We have here Daniel Salves from TNI Institute, Transnational Institute. He's a fellow member of the board, if I'm right.
I'm a
And,
fellow.
and we would like to welcome you, first of all, in this international conference on alternative strategies for the energy sector. And we had a very interesting first panel yesterday. It was the first day of the conference. And your presentation, if I got it right, was more or less regarding the character experiences from Latin America on the state-owned enterprises around energy. So what's your basic argument? What was the basic point that you wanted to share with the other people in the conference?
Yeah, my presentation was based not just on individual research, but based on research performed by an international network. TNI is part of the Municipal Services Project, which is a global network with a composition of universities, research centers, trade unions, civic organizations from different continents. And what we are looking is two alternatives to privatization, and even more alternative to the mercantilization of public services. Because we know that there is privatization, but there are also other forms of hidden intervention of the market in the provision of public services. And we are also doing research on that. So I did focus on my presentation on struggles against privatization and also alternatives to privatization. And I come from a continent, from Latin America, where we do have quite a lot of experience in this area. In fact, many of the problems that Greece is facing today are quite similar to the problems we have faced in the past. So I did show in my presentation some possible alternatives. For instance, in terms of resistance to privatization, I come from a country where some years ago there was a referendum. A referendum was called by social organization because the constitution allows, if you collect a number of signatures, to call for a referendum. And more than 70% of the people in Uruguay voted against the privatization of public enterprises. And that included companies in the electricity sector, in the telecommunication sector, in the energy sector more in general. And then we had another referendum that changed the constitution in order to say that water and sanitation were basic human rights and couldn't be privatized. So this shows that people in my country and in other parts of Latin America really value public enterprises, because we know that public enterprises are not always perfect, but they can be an alternative. What we have to do is to democratize the management of public enterprises. And that has to do with another issue I covered yesterday, which is what we call in the context of the municipal service project, corporatization. Because another problem we are facing today is that there are many companies that are formally public, formally owned by the state, but tend to behave like any private enterprises. So we are also doing research against corporatization, and corporatization refers to companies that are formally public, formally owned by the state, but which in practice behave like any private corporation. For instance, I refer to one example, which I think is quite clear example, Empresas Públicas de Medellín, Public Enterprises of Medellín, which is a model company in terms of efficiency, which proves that the state can be a great manager, very sustainable in economic terms, but with a terrible records in terms of environment, for instance. So we have to be careful about that. So we need to democratize the state. We need to democratize public enterprises. But we also have to defend these public enterprises, because if there is a privatization, it's quite difficult to turn back. But in Latin America, there are also examples of turning back. And I mentioned that in my presentation because we had examples of renationalization. For instance, in Bolivia, the electricity sector was renationalized. The first year was in the area of generation, and then it was completed when the state took control of distribution. In Venezuela, there are also many examples of renationalization of public services in the telecommunication sector, in the energy sector. In Argentina, the major oil company of the country was partially renationalized in the year 2012, when the Argentinian government took control of Repsol, a Spanish corporation, even though today we are seeing some problem because it wasn't full renationalization, and for instance, the Argentinian state is asking Chevron to bring in expertise into their country to get the gas out. And that has to do with fracking and many other issues. So nothing is perfect, but we see a lot of light, and we have to try to expand that light. So we need to defend public enterprises, and we need to democratize public enterprises.
Thank you for this, and just a very brief question. So you see the potential for this kind of renationalization and democratization in countries of Europe, for example, where the context is completely different, radically
yeah, and
different?
there are some examples.
Yeah, like
for
Germany.
instance, in the context of the Municipal Services Project and TNI, we published last year a book on remunicipalization. And we look at different examples of local governments regaining control of local public enterprises, local public utilities, in particular in the electricity sector. But for instance, there is also a campaign in Germany, for instance, in the city of Berlin. They are fighting towards the creation of a new kind of local public company, which would be ecological, social, and locally and democratic control. We have to be careful about the expectation about renationalization at the broader level in Europe, because there are also some risks. For instance, the European Commission is negotiating with the United States a transatlantic partnership, a new kind of free trade agreement that creates a lot of new risk to the survival and the possible expansion of public enterprises.
And restrictions.
Yeah, a lot of restrictions. So we need to also care about free trade agreements and investment protection agreements, because they can be a real problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming to Greece.
Thank you.